The power of habits. What is a habit? Simply put, it is a person's customary way of thinking or behaving. Habitual behavior is natural or automatic and does not demand self-analysis. For better or for worse, habits become a part of who we are and constitute an intrinsic aspect of our personality. For example, those who are habituated to drinking bed tea find it difficult to get out of bed without their morning cup. Those who are accustomed to a game of tennis after office feel uneasy on rainy days when they cannot play. Those who have the habit of drinking wine with their meal cannot swallow their dinner without it. And those who are used to uplifting their mind through daily sadhana, or spiritual practice, feel uncomfortable if they miss it even a single day. The power of conditioning. In India's Gajapati district of southern Odisha, is an area at the base of Mahendragiri Hills, where elephants are trained. I once visited Mahendragiri and found a row of elephants roped to wooden stakes dug into the earth. I asked the Mahout, elephant caretaker, about the secret of the elephant's docility. The Mahout explained, Swamiji, when the elephant is a baby, it is tied with ropes to a stake. Initially, it is not used to being secured, so it pulls and pulls. Since it is weak and the rope is strong, it keeps tugging in vain till a day comes when it realizes that no tugging will help. Then, it stops and stands still. Now it is conditioned. Later, when it becomes a huge and mighty adult tusker, it is still tied with the rope to the stake. With one tug, it could walk away to freedom, but it goes nowhere because it has been conditioned. We humans too tend to behave according to our habitual conditioning. We act through the force of habit as our mind is conditioned. As humans we are free to choose differently, but rarely do we consider the available alternatives. Our everyday attitudes also come from mental conditioning. If we have habituated our mind to see the positive side of things, we are likely to remain cheerful and optimistic even when difficult situations arise. If we have accustomed our mind to doubt or to see the worst in others, we will habitually suspect even their best-intentioned actions. Similarly, thoughts of generosity, empathy, fear, and envy also come to us from habitual thought patterns. First, we mold our habits, and later, our habits mold us. Why do habits grip us so powerfully? This is because of the way in which the brain has been hardwired. Let us understand how. The neuroplastic nature of the brain. The science of neurology says the human brain is endowed with 100 billion neurons. These combine with each other to form trillions of neural circuits. Every thought pattern we generate within our mind uses neural connections. When we repeatedly harbor a pattern of thoughts, their neural circuit becomes etched in the brain. This phenomenon called neuroplasticity is the ability of the mind to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections in response to situations or changes in the environment. The consequence of neuroplasticity is that when a neural circuit becomes intensely engraved in the brain, the corresponding thought pattern comes more easily to the mind, thereby conditioning it. The first to postulate the impact of habituation on human and animal behavior was Ivan Pavlov, the famous Russian physiologist who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1904. You may have heard of his famous experiments with dogs. Pavlov's research paved the way for the classical conditioning theory. He initially began his study to gather information on the digestive system of dogs. With the help of his laboratory assistants, he documented the amount dogs would salivate, since mammals produce saliva in the mouth that helps break down food. The lab assistants who fed the dogs would wear white coats. However, Pavlov soon noticed that even without being presented with food, the dogs began drooling simply on seeing the white coat assistants. He then conducted a study in which he rang a bell every time he fed the dogs. Soon, just ringing of the bell made the dogs salivate. The dogs had learned to associate the bell with the food, and as a result, ringing the bell evoked the same response as the food itself. This led to the theory of classical conditioning, which shed new light on human behavior. Psychologists now understood how thought patterns get etched in neural pathways in the brain. How can we leverage this nature of neuroplasticity to our benefit? This requires us to first understand the process of habit formation. The physiology of habit formation. Whenever we decide to do any physical or mental work, our brain fires neurons in different regions including the sensory motor region, the neocortex, and the prefrontal lobes. But the beauty is that the brain has a self-programming ability. When it sees some activity being repeated, it creates shortcuts of the neural sequences and stores them in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for learning, habits, and emotions. This enables the brain to engage in those activities with greater ease in the future. Habit formation is thus the brain's way of simplifying its work and making it more efficient. For example, the first time we began typing, our brain had to exert itself to the maximum to identify and press the required keys. Consequently, it took us a few minutes to type a handful of words. However, as we continued typing, the brain began programming itself. The moment we thought of a letter, our finger would fly on the keyboard to press the corresponding key. The brain had created programs for the neural sequences to be fired for the task. With repeated practice, the brain began forming programs for entire words, enabling the keys to be pressed in multiple sequences. As a result, after a year of training, we were typing at speeds of 50 words a minute and above. Without such a self-programming ability, typing would have been as laborious as it was on the first day. Then we would be unable to think of anything else while typing. Fortunately, the power of habits simplifies the brain's work, and along with typing, we are also able to think, imagine, and plan. Similarly, we multitask while we drive. We speak to passengers, listen to audio talks, and plan the rest of our day. However, on the first day of driving, the tasks of simultaneously controlling the steering, accelerator, and brakes are so formidable that they take up all our attention. With continued practice, the brain keeps programming itself, creating habits out of these tasks. Finally, the day comes when we can simultaneously drive and engage in a spirited conversation without risk. By creating habitual programs, the brain gets its work done while expending much less energy. A study was conducted to observe cerebral activity in rats. The rats were left in a maze, at a distance from a chunk of cheese. They slowly sniffed their way to it. As the experiment was repeated, their brain began learning the pathways and they progressed more quickly to the cheese. After a month, on being left in the maze, they could run towards the cheese. The instruments on their head showed that brain activity progressively reduced as the learning occurred. The habit loop. A habit has three parts to it: 1. Stimulus, 2. Response, and 3. Reward. The stimulus works like a trigger for the brain, which then responds with the conditioned behavior. That behavior generates a reward which further reinforces the pattern for the future. For example, if for a month, while watching TV, you drank tea regularly, it would grow into a habit. Now, whenever you sit before the TV, it acts as a trigger. The brain responds by creating the desire for tea. And when you drink the tea, the sensual gratification is the reward that reinforces the habit loop. The brain is so smart that it does not need an external reward for reinforcement. It generates the feel-good chemicals serotonin, endorphin, and dopamine and sends them to the part of the brain that was engaged in the activity. These chemicals create the feel-good sensation, which is the reward. Consider another example. Suppose that working on your assignment is drudgery for the brain, which seeks some diversion. When you hear the chime of a new email, you go to your inbox and check it. This provides a welcome distraction from work. The brain gets relief from the present drudgery and a slight pleasure from the content of the email. Plus, the feel-good chemicals created by the brain reinforce the habit loop. Now every time the email bell chimes, the mind generates an irresistible desire for reading it, which is hard to overcome. It has become a habit. The patterns of habits become so strong that people find themselves helpless in changing them. Studies have shown that habits remain even after surgery is done on the brains of alcoholics. On the appearance of old cues, the cravings for rewards manifest again, waiting to exert their power on the mind. Cues for habitual behavior can be of infinite variety: a picture of ice cream, a certain place, a certain time of the day, or the company of a particular person. The routines they trigger can be a mere emotion that comes for milliseconds or a complex sequence of behaviors. The rewards vary: emotional payoff, chemical gratification, sensual pleasure, mental stimulation, or any combination of these. Habits often enter our lives without our conscious permission. But they grow so strong that they shape our destiny far more than we realize. They cause our brain to latch onto them, to the exclusion of all else, including common sense. In this way, habits can be compared to a cable. Each day, we weave a thread of the cable. The singular thread seems too weak to hold us, however, when woven together, the cable is almost unbreakable. But the good news is that habits can be changed. Social researchers conducted studies to understand why families increased their fast food consumption when a fast food outlet moved into their neighborhood. They found that advertisements, picturesque billboards, and other allurements successfully created cues for triggering the habit loop for eating French fries. The pleasurable taste of fat, salt, and crispy fries provided the natural reward. Inadvertently, customer behavior was influenced to the extent that some of the families began taking their dinner daily at the fast food joint. When the outlet moved out of the neighborhood, the family habit slowly began changing. They started having food at home more often. Within a year, the habit had fully subsided. The conclusion was that habits are changeable. The brain's quality of neuroplasticity works like a two-edged sword. On the negative side, it programs and shackles our thinking in deleterious thought patterns. On the positive side, it provides an opportunity to reshape the brain, disband old habits, and install new ones. Thus, habits can be learned and unlearned. The potential is immense. Good and bad habits. Habits can be compared to macros in an Excel sheet. If we have tasks we wish to repeat in multiple cells, we can record a macro to automate them and quickly apply the set of actions to selected cells. Habits are like macros in the brain. On receiving the given cue, the brain automatically performs the actions of its programming. However, there is a catch to it. The created macro does not care whether it was correctly designed or not. If correct, it saves time through automated processes. But if the macro itself is wrong, we end up with a messed up Excel sheet. Likewise, habits too program the brain for our benefit or harm. Here is an anecdotal tale about habits. In the early 20th century, a British explorer came across a group of cannibals. They sat around a feast of human flesh and were about to eat. The explorer was surprised to learn that the tribal chief had studied at Cambridge University. "You have received good education and you still eat human flesh?" the traveler asked. "Yes," replied the cannibal chief. "The only difference is that earlier I used to eat with my fingers, and now I eat with a knife and fork. As the vintage saying goes, old habits die hard." Unfortunately, good habits require effort for their creation, while bad habits develop all too easily. You indulge in something that gives pleasure in the moment. While the habit is forming, you do not realize the serious long-term harm it is causing, and you carelessly repeat the pleasurable indulgence. In a few weeks, the habit grips you, and you find yourself bound by the habit loop: stimulus response reward. Good habits are hard to come by and easy to live with. Conversely, bad habits develop easily and are hard to live with. Given the fact that bad habits harm us, we need to be more aware of the repeated choices we make. Very often, people unconsciously make choices in their lives. It is like the horse rider, who, when asked where he was going, replied, "I don't know, ask the horse." The horse rider's response was comical because he should have set the direction, not the horse. Similarly, our unconscious choices create bad habits we later live to regret. The reason bad habits get a grip on us is that the first few times we repeat a harmful behavior, it does not seem to do much damage. The first few puffs of a cigarette do not forebode that cigarettes are addictive. The initial pegs of alcohol do not warn us of the obsessive compulsion that lies ahead. Take the example of a giant sequoia tree that lives for over 2,000 years and grows up to a height of 300 feet, the height of a 20-story building. Yet, as you travel the Yosemite Forest in California, you find a huge sequoia lying on the ground. What happened to it? It was born 2 millennia in the past and was thriving until a few decades ago. Then, a beetle came to live on it. The huge tree seemed to be in no danger from the little creature. But within a year, there were hundreds of beetles crawling on the tree. In 4 years, the beetles had made gigantic colonies on the tree. They now had the upper hand and were invincible. During the 5th year, the giant tree, one of the biggest in the world, had been felled by the tiny beetles. Similarly, when a person first takes bang, marijuana, the changes in the body and mind seem so minute that the user is almost unaware of them. But the habit loop has been set in motion. Every indulgence thereafter acts like a thread in the cable until the cable is so strong that it becomes an addiction. Even visits to the rehabilitation center are of no use in breaking it. The same is the case with good habits. In the short run, their benefits may seem imperceptible. Going for one session of yoga on Sunday may not make any noticeable difference to your health. However, if you consistently do yoga 5 to 6 days a week, and continue week after week, then in the space of a few years, you will definitely become a healthier person. Taking a glass of water upon waking up one day may be of no significance. But if you habitually drink water first thing every morning, your digestive system will undoubtedly become better in a few years. Thus, the benefit of a good habit is the cumulative impact it has in the long run. Use the power of habits to build a noble character over time. Our habits form or build our character. A virtuous character is the consequence of morally upright habits. For example, if we are truthful day after day, week after week, and year after year, it becomes installed within us as a habit. In this way, honesty does not come by itself, it is a habit we ingrain within ourselves. Once installed, the habit of honesty prevents us from wandering off course morally or ethically in our day-to-day behavior. Building a noble character requires the elimination of detrimental habits and installation of beneficial ones. Without success in this, we will remain fettered slaves of our mind and senses. Like a rudderless ship in a stormy ocean, we will continually be tossed around by the waves of Maya that come in the form of anger, greed, desire, envy, and illusion. Ralph Waldo Emerson expressed this well when he said, "Sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny." We must thus apply ourselves to the task of breaking our dysfunctional habits and developing beneficial ones. If this seems an arduous task, let us take encouragement from the fact that even animals change painful habits, as the story here illustrates. India has many popular tales of the 17th century Mughal emperor, Akbar, and his wise and intelligent minister, Birbal. It is said that Akbar once asked Birbal if there was anyone in his kingdom who could train goats to resist green grass. Birbal replied that it was a small matter, and he needed just a month to get it done. Birbal then took a goat to his home. Every day he would place fresh green grass before the goat, but the moment it would try to eat the grass, he would whack the goat severely on the mouth with a stick. Finally, even the goat's tiny intellect learned that eating the grass was too painful and the reward was not worth its while. After a month's training, Birbal brought the goat to Akbar's court. He announced to the king, "Your Majesty, this goat is trained. It will not eat even the most succulent grass." Akbar asked his servants to bring fresh grass. He put the grass before the goat's nose. In the meantime, Birbal twirled the stick in his hand. The goat looked at the grass, then looked at the stick, and turned its head away. It had learned to resist eating grass by grasping the dreadful penalty. This story reveals the basic nature of all creatures including humans. We all wish to avoid pain. On becoming aware of the painful consequences, even the unintelligent goat learned to break away from its natural tendency of eating grass. Likewise, we too must become aware of the miserable long-term consequences of bad habits. If we can convince ourselves of the harm they cause us and the pain they inflict upon us, we will be able to break their gravitational pull. But this is only half the story. At this point, it becomes important to understand the two different kinds of happiness that exist. Two types of happiness, Shreya and Prita. The Vedas speak about two kinds of pleasure, Shreya and Prita. Shreya is that pleasure which seems bitter in the beginning but becomes very sweet in the long run. Prita is that pleasure which seems pleasant in the present but causes great pain later. The difference between them is akin to delayed gratification versus immediate gratification. An example of Shreya is the eating of amla or the Indian gooseberry. Amla is a superfood that is very beneficial for health. Each amla has the vitamin C of 10 oranges. However, children dislike it since it has a bitter taste. Parents in India encourage children to eat it, saying, Amal kakaya or bado kakaha, bad me pata halta. The benefits of both these eating amla and following the advice of elders are experienced in the future. Interestingly, within a couple of minutes of eating the amla, the bitter taste in the mouth transforms into sweetness. And the long-term benefits of consuming natural vitamin C are undoubtedly numerous. Shreya happiness is of the same nature. It appears bitter in the short term but is like nectar in the end. Prita is the opposite. It seems like ambrosia initially but proves to be poisonous in the end. Regarding Shreya and Prita, the Kathapanis head of the Krishna Yajurveda states, Anyashriya Niyadutava Prayast Ubhi Nanarth Purusha Sanita Teo Shor Ayadadanasia Sadhu Bhavti Hyat Hridaya Priyavran Itriyash Shapriyash Shamanish Yamatastasam Paratya Vivinakti Dhira Shriya Hidhiro Bipriyasovran Itpriya Mondo Yogakshimad Vrinite, 1.2.1, 2. There are two paths, one, beneficial, and the other, pleasant. These two lead humans to very different ends. The pleasant is enjoyable in the beginning and ends in pain. The ignorant are snared to the pleasant and perish. But the wise are not deceived by its attractions. They choose the beneficial one and finally attain happiness. With the help of this understanding, we feel empowered to modify bad habits. First, we must repeatedly analyze and convince ourselves of the benefits that will accrue from changing negative habits. Second, we must reflect deeply on the pain that will be caused by not changing. We can enumerate all the pleasures and pains, benefits and harmful effects, advantages and disadvantages. For example, if we wish to develop the habit of setting aside a half hour every day for exercise, a possible analysis could be, happiness from cultivating the habit of exercising for 30 minutes daily, 1. Improved well-being, 2. Continued youthfulness, 3. Feeling of time well spent, 4. More mental clarity, 5. Improved self-image, 6. Reduction of bad cholesterol, 7. Development of a healthy heart, 8. Improved muscle mass, 9. More appealing personality, 10. Greater stamina for work, pain from not cultivating this healthy habit, 1. Unhealthy body, 2. Lethargy, 3. Weight gain, 4. Forced to buy new clothes, 5. Displeasure of spouse, 6. Lack of self-confidence among friends, 7. Earlier onset of old age, 8. Increased risk of blood sugar and diabetes, 9. Weak self-image, 10. Lack of self-control and willpower. This is a sample analysis for developing a good habit. Now, if we wish to get rid of a bad habit, how should we convince ourselves? We can list the happiness we will get by eradicating it. We should also make a list of the pain if we continue with it. For example, if we wish to break the habit of eating junk food, a possible analysis could be, happiness from breaking the habit of eating junk food, 1. Weight control, 2. Reduced risk of diabetes, 3. Focus on more nutritious diet, 4. Longer and healthier life, 5. Improved self-image, 6. The feel-good factor of a better conscience, 7. More appealing personality, 8. Greater stamina for work, 9. Financial savings, 10. Spouse's satisfaction and respect, pain from continuing the habit of eating junk food, 1. Obesity, 2. Displeasure of spouse, 3. Lack of self-control and willpower, 4. Discomfort of conscience for not doing what is proper, 5. Poor self-image due to weak will, 6. Disrespect of friends and well-wishers, 7. Shorter and unhealthier life, 8. Reduced energy for work, 9. Early onset of old age 10, increased risk of diabetes. We must deeply convince ourselves of the painful consequences of bad habits and the peace of mind that accrues from good habits. The technique of contemplation, chintan, reflecting upon a piece of knowledge to transform it into a conviction, will be elaborated in the 5th chapter. When we are deeply convinced about the benefits of a certain thought pattern or action, we naturally try to adopt it. It grows on us every time we practice it. With sufficient repetition, the new thought or behavior solidifies into a new habit, replacing the old one. Then one day, like the firm rope made from puny blades of straw, the new behavior becomes an integral part of our personality. This is how one develops a great personality, with a shining character forged from virtuous habits. Jagadguru Kripalaji Maharaj recommended spending a few minutes for introspection before going to bed every day, to reflect on where we improved our behavior and where we needed to put in more effort. He advised maintaining a diary for the purpose. A diary or journal is a powerful tool for staying on track in the effort for self-improvement. Mahatma Gandhi was fond of maintaining a self-improvement diary. Benjamin Franklin is another famous example of someone who used a diary for establishing good habits. His efforts for self-transformation are chronicled in the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He had a list of 13 habits that he wanted to change. He jotted them down and then focused on one habit every week. He kept track of it daily, documenting whether he practiced it or not. A simple check mark, square root, indicated success, while a cross, X, indicated failure. At the end of the week, he could see how well he was adopting the habit of the week. Breaking the gravitational pull of bad habits. The best time to overcome bad habits is before they are established. Our rational intellect must evaluate their cumulative power. Drinking a peg of alcohol may not be bad for health in a day, but over the years, ingesting hundreds of gallons will definitely be unhealthy for us. An action when done just once is negligible but becomes very significant when it is repeated over an extended period of time. However, if bad habits have already been created, they do not go away on their own. They are always on do-it-yourself projects. They are like cables formed from iron strands. Individually, the strands can be snapped with a little effort. But tied together, they become a formidable cable with the strength to lift many tons of weight. Likewise, stray actions are easy to correct, but once etched as habits by force of repetition, they possess strength that becomes difficult to break. As a result, changing old habits is never easy. It is like launching a rocket into space. In the first few minutes of the flight, as the rocket breaks through the downward pull of gravity, maximum fuel is needed. Once the escape velocity has been achieved, the energy consumed becomes marginal, and the rocket is practically propelled by its own momentum. Hence, more fuel is consumed in the lift-off than in the millions of miles of travel that follows. The same applies to habits. They exert a gravitational force on our personality that must be broken with patience, commitment, and understanding. The lift-off demands tremendous effort. But once we break out of the gravitational pull of shackling habits, our freedom acquires a completely new dimension. So, how can we achieve this lift-off? The importance of willpower. Changing habits can be a profitable task but also one of the most challenging. Uprooting bad habits that have grown up to become mighty oaks is no child's play. Even the slightest progress in this direction requires self-control to resist bad behavior and act upon the good one. Thus, we may read the best books and hear the best knowledge, but if we are lacking in willpower, we will not be able to benefit from this information. The gap between knowledge and its practice must always be bridged by discipline. Abundance of willpower provides us the strength to resist animal-like impulses when they raise their head. Hence, it is on the bedrock of self-restraint that we must build habits that will bestow on us a lifetime of courage, forbearance, and peace. In reality, lack of self-control is akin to a mental disease that makes us feeble and irresolute. When we see this weakness within, we must make it a priority to stamp it out. We develop self-discipline by exercising it, in much the same way as we build our muscles. Every time we follow through on a resolution, we liberate the force of willpower within. But each time we break our resolve not to indulge in sense pleasures, the muscle of self-control becomes emaciated. In this way, small moment-to-moment victories lead to larger successes. The more we exert our willpower, the greater it grows. But if we neglect it, our self-discipline will dwindle and wither away, like unused muscles in the body. Let us exert ourselves courageously to fight the gravitational pull of our bad habits. Once the new habit begins to grow, it becomes progressively easier, and then, one day the desired behavior comes naturally. When we see people with stellar qualities, we wonder how they reached there. Well, it was all a matter of exerting their willpower for some time, until the new habit kicked in. As simple as that. Understanding this, let us push ourselves to unleash the power of a controlled mind and an illumined intellect. I have covered this topic in great detail in my book, 7 Mindsets for Success, Happiness, and Fulfillment. Having said this, a word of caution is again necessary, for changing habits is never easy. Even when the change seems to have been effected, there is always a danger of falling back into old behaviors and thought patterns. The reason is that the basal ganglia remembers the context that triggers a habit, so old habits can be revived whenever triggers reappear. Thus, it is important, while endeavoring to change, to warily avoid the triggers that previously reinforced the old habit. With a firm decision to transform, we should exercise utmost care to sidestep the contexts conducive to old habits. Such a firm decision requires the intellect to become resolute and illumined. Our discussion on habits has naturally led to the topic of the intellect. What is its function and how is it different from the mind? We consider this question in the next chapter. Summary of the main points: most of our thoughts and behaviors are not a consciously analyzed response to situations. We respond involuntarily based on our habitual thought patterns. Positive thinking cannot be accomplished through individual thoughts. It requires installing the desired thought patterns as habits within ourselves. A repetitive thought etches a deep groove in the neural network of the brain, making the recurrence of that thought very easy. In this manner, habits exert a gravitational pull upon our behavior that becomes difficult to break. Good character is the result of good habits, while bad character results from bad habits. To change unwanted habits, we must repeatedly convince ourselves of the benefits that will accrue from changing these detrimental habits. We must also reflect deeply about the pain that will be caused by not changing them. Just as a rocket expends more fuel during takeoff than in the rest of its flight, similarly the lift-off in the process of forging new habits is the most difficult. It requires developing and exercising the muscle of willpower. With sufficient repetition, the new behavior or thought develops into a new habit, replacing the old one. During the transition phase, avoid the context that triggers the old habit.